A mother appeared dirty at her son's graduation. When he took the microphone, all the guests were surprised by what he said. Before starting the story, comment below to tell us which city you're watching this video from. The city of São Paulo woke up slowly that morning, with the sunlight streaming between towering buildings and spilling into narrow streets, where life was already stirring with the sounds of people trading goods and laughter filling the air. Luciana moved carefully, balancing a tray full of sweets that she had prepared with dedication. Each one of those treats, every coconut, every small candy, embodied the effort and hope she put in each day to support her son, Henrique. She walked through streets she knew like the back of her hand, greeting old friends, serving loyal customers, and sharing smiles with passers-by, despite feeling the weight of exhaustion on her shoulders. Life had not given her an easy path, especially after her husband's passing, when she was still carrying Henrique in her womb. Luciana found herself alone, bearing the immense responsibility of raising her son, and it was in the streets of São Paulo that she found her strength, beginning to sell sweets. Day by day, every coin she earned allowed her to bring home sustenance and a sense of dignity. As Luciana began another day of work, Henrique, neatly dressed in his uniform with a worn-out backpack, made his way to school. He was tall for his age, with an attentive gaze and a posture that reflected determination. Although he seemed like an ordinary teenager, his heart held the maturity of someone who knew the harshness of life. His school was well known in the city, attended by São Paulo's elite, and he was only there thanks to a scholarship he had earned through his outstanding academic performance. Despite the high-quality facilities and the prestige of the teachers, Henrique faced the painful reality of not feeling like he belonged in that environment. The hallways were cold, and the respect that students usually showed each other rarely extended to him. He knew that for many, he was merely an outsider, someone there by the system's favor rather than by right. So, he kept to himself, avoiding talking about his personal life or mentioning his mother's work, fully aware that some classmates would look down on him even more if they knew that, unlike their mothers, his did not drive a luxury car or carry designer bags, but sold sweets from dawn to dusk to meet their basic needs. Henrique had learned to endure the looks and subtle comments, but that morning as he reached the school gate, he saw two figures that made him clench his fists: Gustavo and Bruno, heirs to two of the wealthiest families in the city. From the start of the school year, they had made it their mission to remind him how different he was from them, mocking his worn-out backpack, his old cell phone, and any other detail that revealed his situation. Henrique passed by them in silence, trying to ignore their restrained laughs, until he felt Gustavo approach him, positioning himself at his side as if they were old friends. At that moment, Gustavo sneered. "So, Henrique, when are you going to upgrade that ancient phone of yours?" He held up his own, the latest model, with a mocking smile. "Or are you waiting for it to be put in a museum?" he added. Bruno, who had come over shortly after, forced a laugh. "Maybe he's hoping to get a new one for Christmas," he chimed in. "But hadn't you stopped believing in Santa Claus?" Henrique replied with feigned innocence, looking at Gustavo, who chuckled. Henrique had learned not to react to these comments, even though each word felt like a small wound that stung over time. He looked down and mumbled something inaudible. "What did you say?" taunted Bruno, leaning in to hear. "Nothing," he responded firmly, looking up. "Just that I have more important things to do." This cold, curt answer caught both boys off guard, and they looked him up and down, before giving one last laugh and walking away. Henrique knew it wouldn't end there. Gustavo and Bruno seemed to have a constant need to assert their superiority, and Henrique's calm silence appeared to challenge that view they held so dearly. Throughout the day, he worked hard to stay focused in class, writing down everything the teachers said, absorbing all the knowledge that might help him reach a different future. Despite the challenges and differences he faced, he knew this was his path, his chance to honor Luciana's sacrifice. During breaks, he sat alone in a corner of the courtyard, always engrossed in a book or going over his notes. In those quiet moments, he found the strength to ignore the taunts. At the end of the day, while his classmates waited for their drivers in luxury cars, Henrique packed his books into his worn-out backpack and walked to the bus stop, where he'd wait for public transit. The ride home was long, but he used that time to reflect and make plans. He dreamed of the day he could finally repay his mother, giving her the rest and pride of knowing her hard work had paid off. When he arrived home, he found Luciana in the kitchen, preparing dinner with a tired smile that brightened as soon as she saw him walk in. She put down the wooden spoon and walked over to gently touch his face, looking at him with concern. "How was your day, son?" Henrique smiled. "It was fine, Mom." He tried to hide any signs of fatigue or sadness. Luciana gazed at him with tenderness and pride, knowing in her heart that her son carried a special strength, a resilience that helped him face the daily challenges. In that look, they shared a silent understanding that every effort and every sacrifice served a purpose. That night, as the city of São Paulo fell into quiet, Luciana and Henrique shared a calm dinner together, bound by a love that transcended poverty and pain. For them, hope was reborn each day, and they both knew that together they could face any hardship, even without knowing what the future held. Henrique's days at school became a true test of endurance. Every week, Gustavo and Bruno found new ways to humiliate him, constantly reminding him of the gap in social status that separated them. It seemed they provoked him in hopes of triggering some reaction, wanting to see if they could truly get under his skin. However, Henrique, with a strength he didn't even know he possessed, stood strong and silent, weathering each offense. One particularly difficult afternoon, Gustavo decided to entertain a group of classmates at Henrique's expense. Henrique was sitting in the courtyard, reading a book peacefully. With a fake smile, Gustavo approached him with Bruno by his side and, feigning interest, asked, "Hey, Henrique, what are you reading?" Henrique looked up warily, but replied calmly, "It's about quantum physics. It relates to the program I want to study." Gustavo raised his eyebrows and let out a mocking laugh. "Quantum physics? So you want to be a scientist, huh?" Before Henrique could respond, Bruno jumped in. "Imagine the genius here, with his ancient cell phone and his falling-apart backpack. Big ambitions for someone who doesn't even have a place to drop dead." The group around them burst into laughter, and Henrique felt his face flush, but he held back. He knew that reacting would only give them the satisfaction of knowing they'd gotten to him. With a strength that seemed to come from the deepest part of himself, Henrique turned his attention back to his book, pretending that the words hadn't affected him. Frustrated by his lack of response, Gustavo and Bruno walked away. Yet in the quiet of the courtyard, Henrique could still feel the weight of their disdain in every word he had just heard, wondering how much longer he could resist without giving in to anger, without letting those hurtful comments leave wounds that might be hard to heal. As he walked home, questions and doubts followed him. Luciana, always busy with work, was completely unaware of what he endured every day. To her, the fact that Henrique was studying at such a prestigious school was a source of immense pride. She often shared with neighbors her hopes for the bright future awaiting her son, and that genuine hope kept her going each day. It was her strength, the reason she got up before dawn and faced the weight of the sweet trays with a smile that hid her exhaustion. Henrique, on his part, kept these internal battles to himself to avoid worrying her. He couldn't bear the thought of her knowing the truth about his classmates' contempt. He knew Luciana would do anything to protect him, but he didn't want her to bear that anguish. For him, silence was a way of shielding her, a way of honoring her sacrifice. Weeks passed, and Henrique remained focused on his studies. His teachers soon noticed his dedication, and though they rarely commented on it, they recognized the effort he put into every assignment. One teacher in particular, Mr. Alvaro, who taught math, took a special interest in him. Alvaro, a man with a deep voice and piercing gaze, soon noticed certain signs of fatigue and discouragement in Henrique. He often called him after class to talk, asking about his progress and offering support in whatever he might need. During one of these conversations, Alvaro asked Enrique about his plans for the future. "I want to study physics," Enrique replied, with a confidence that surprised the teacher. "You know that will demand a lot from you, right?" Alvaro said, watching him closely. Enrique nodded without hesitation. "I know, but I have to do it. It's not just for me," he continued, his voice firm. "It's also for everything my mother has done for me up to now." Professor Alvaro looked at Enrique in silence for a moment, sensing the depth of his words. Although he didn't know all the details, he could tell that Enrique's path was laden with a sense of responsibility few of his classmates could understand. He placed a hand on the young man's shoulder in a silent gesture of support, conveying confidence, as if to say, "I believe in you." Despite Alvaro's understanding and support, Enrique couldn't shake the weight he felt. The humiliations lingered like persistent shadows, growing heavier with each new taunt and every laugh behind his back in the hallways. He was beginning to realize that no matter how strong he tried to remain, Gustavo and Bruno's words were leaving deep scars, chipping away at his determination. Alone in his room, he finally allowed himself to be vulnerable, releasing emotions that he hid from everyone else's view. In those moments, Enrique would stare into space, questioning whether he'd be able to hold on until the end of the school year, wondering if all his efforts would ever be rewarded. He wanted to believe it would be worth it, that the promise of a better future would come true, but doubt had started to creep into his mind. Meanwhile, Luciana was entirely unaware of this suffering. To her, Enrique was a bright, dedicated young man who would someday achieve all the dreams she herself had been unable to fulfill. One evening, while they were having dinner together, she spoke excitedly. "Oh, my dear, I can already picture the day you graduate. What a joy that'll be. I don't even know what I'll do with all that happiness." Enrique, lost in his thoughts, snapped back to reality at his mother's words and offered a slight smile. "It'll be a great day, Mom," he replied calmly. "All that I do is to make that day come," Enrique thought sincerely. His words held a deep truth, but also a hint of sadness. He knew reality was much harsher than Luciana could imagine. Every day his classmates' disdain reminded him that to achieve his dreams, he would have to fight a battle that went beyond academics. He didn't just have to study. He had to endure prejudice, humiliation, and the voices telling him he didn't belong in that world. But Enrique wasn't willing to give up. Even though he felt the weight of sadness, he knew his greatest victory would be to persevere and push forward, honoring his mother's sacrifice. He promised himself, night after night, that as long as he had hope, he would stand strong, finding in every challenge the drive to overcome any obstacle. Graduation was approaching as an inevitable milestone, a dream Luciana had held close since the day Enrique won the scholarship. For her, this event would not only mark the end of a chapter, but also the fulfillment of a promise for a better future. With this in mind, she began saving carefully, tightening her already limited budget. She stopped buying a few things for herself and increased her sales of sweets, planning every detail of what she called in her heart the big day. Luciana decided that, for this special moment, she deserved at least a new dress. In her simple life, she rarely bought anything for herself, but Enrique's graduation was an occasion she wanted to honor for both him and herself. As the weeks passed, she saved every coin, picturing herself, perhaps for the first time in years, dressed for a moment of celebration. It would be Enrique's victory, but also her own. At home, while Luciana secretly prepared for the graduation, Enrique approached the event with calm anticipation. Being chosen as the class speaker was an honor he never imagined he'd achieve, and he was eager to dedicate his speech to his mother, to her strength and resilience. But he also felt a tinge of unease. He wanted to honor her subtly, without exposing her to the curiosity or judgment that some of his classmates might show if they knew his story. For Enrique, graduation was more than just an ending. It marked the beginning of a new chapter, a milestone honoring all the sacrifices Luciana had made to give him a brighter future. The speech became his way to express his gratitude, hinting that all his achievements were a result of his mother's efforts. One morning, however, his enthusiasm drew some unwanted attention. Enrique was discussing the responsibility of being the speaker with Professor Alvaro, unaware that Gustavo and Bruno were watching from a distance, growing increasingly annoyed. They exchanged knowing looks, intrigued by the spark in Enrique's eyes. "Look, the scholarship kid is going to be the class speaker," Gustavo whispered to Bruno with a venomous tone. "He must think he's the star of the school now." "Who would have thought?" With a malicious grin, he added, "All he needs now is some inspirational speech." But Gustavo had more than just sneers in mind. He watched Enrique with a calculating gaze, noticing the significance Enrique seemed to place on the moment. To Gustavo, the ceremony was the perfect opportunity to ruin what was meant to be the most important day of Enrique's life. With mocking smiles, he and Bruno began planning how they'd humiliate him, while Luciana, oblivious to their schemes, continued her routine, selling sweets with renewed hope. On one of her rare days off, she decided to visit a simple clothing store. She carefully examined each dress, looking for one that was elegant but not too flashy. She wanted to look polished, yet understated. Finally, she chose a simple, delicate dress that made her smile, imagining how she'd look on graduation day. Luciana lovingly placed the dress on a chair in the living room, gazing at it with pride, as though holding a piece of the dream she had worked so hard to achieve. For her, this outfit symbolized more than a garment. It was the culmination of a lifetime of sacrifices. On the morning of the ceremony, Enrique woke with a blend of nerves and excitement. He found his mother already dressed, making final adjustments to her outfit with a shy smile. She looked different, radiant with a confidence and pride that made her shine. Seeing her, Enrique felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He knew what this day meant to her. "You look beautiful, Mom," he said warmly. Luciana, touched, brushed his face, holding back a tear. "And you, my son, are more than ready. I know this will be an unforgettable day." They walked together toward the school. Before they reached the entrance, Luciana decided to hang back, giving Enrique the space to shine in his own moment. She preferred to enter discreetly, and he nodded, exchanging a final, reassuring glance with her. Enrique then walked ahead, taking the path toward the ceremony venue with a quiet promise to make his mother's sacrifices worthwhile. Luciana felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. But as she turned the corner, she unexpectedly encountered two familiar faces, Gustavo and Bruno. Leaning against a car, both boys eyed her with mocking, inquisitive expressions. Gustavo was the first to approach, smiling in a way that soon revealed his cruelty. "So, you must be the mother of our great speaker, right?" he said, looking her up and down with disdain. "Looks like you put in some effort to look nice for the event." Luciana, taken aback by the hostility, tried to ignore him, but Bruno also stepped forward, chuckling. "With such a simple dress, I think you're going to stand out more than you'd like. Don't you think this kind of event isn't really meant for you?" Before Luciana could respond, Gustavo abruptly shoved her just enough to throw her off balance, causing her carefully chosen dress to get splattered with mud from a puddle. Shocked, Luciana stared down at her stained dress while the two boys laughed, satisfied with the damage they'd caused. Her face flushed with shame and pain, a mix of humiliation and helplessness filling her. Yet she took a deep breath, looked up at the sky, and searched for the strength to carry on. For a moment, she considered turning back to avoid Enrique seeing her like this. But remembering her son's pride and admiration, she knew she couldn't abandon him on such an important day. With a heavy heart, she walked toward the auditorium, slipping into a seat at the back to stay out of sight, while Enrique took the stage to deliver his speech, unaware of what had happened to his mother. From the podium, Enrique scanned the audience until his eyes landed on Luciana at the back of the room. There she was, sitting with her dress stained and her face marked by hurt. In that instant, Enrique understood what had happened. The auditorium was elegantly decorated for the ceremony, with rows of chairs perfectly aligned, a brightly lit stage, and discreet floral arrangements. Everything was set for a celebratory atmosphere, a rite of passage marking the start of new opportunities. But for Henrique, that moment took on a whole new meaning as he saw his mother with her dress marred and sadness in her eyes. Now, what was at stake was more than his accomplishments. It was dignity and respect. Despite what had happened, Luciana sat quietly, her gaze fixed on the floor, but her presence still radiated an unbreakable strength. From the stage, Enrique looked at his mother, feeling a surge of deep anger and sadness. He knew how much this day meant to her, how she dreamed of this moment, and now, because of Gustavo and Bruno's cruelty, she sat humiliated, with her pride and dress both tarnished. Enrique felt his heartbeat quicken and a lump form in his throat. The speech he had so carefully prepared, filled with eloquent phrases and meticulously chosen words, suddenly lost all meaning. His hands shook, and emotion overwhelmed him. Enrique couldn't go through with the speech he'd prepared. Faced with Luciana's suffering, he closed his eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and upon opening them, knew exactly what he needed to do. He set his speech down on the podium and with a still, shaky voice began, "Today was supposed to be a day of celebration, a day to thank everyone who supported me and helped me get here." His voice filled the room, and a deep silence settled as everyone listened intently. "But now, I feel there's something far more important I need to say, something that can no longer stay hidden." Curious eyes from the guests and students fixed on him, while Gustavo and Bruno, seated among the audience, exchanged uneasy glances, still unaware of what was about to unfold. Enrique took another steadying breath and continued, looking directly at his mother, who lifted her head with a mix of surprise and fear. "Today, I want to talk about the person who made it possible for me to be here. The person who, from day one, showed me what true strength and determination mean. My mother, Luciana." Her name resonated throughout the hall, and a murmur spread among the audience. "My mother, who is here today, is the reason behind everything I've achieved. She has devoted every day of her life to giving me the chance at a future, working from dawn till dusk on the streets of São Paulo, selling sweets so that I could be here, to give me this opportunity that so many people take for granted." Enrique's voice grew stronger, driven by the emotion and the need to share a truth he'd kept hidden for so long. Luciana's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of pride, as each word affirmed the worth of her sacrifices. Despite everything, she was the strongest, most dignified person he knew. Yet, Enrique continued, now addressing his classmates, "My mother has been humiliated by some of the people here, people who think they have the right to step on others simply because they have more money or status." Enrique's gaze landed directly on Gustavo and Bruno. His steady, defiant eyes caused both of them to freeze, the shock clear on their faces. "Today, before arriving here," Enrique went on, "my mother was a victim of cruelty by two people who decided that because she is humble, she didn't deserve to be here. They pushed her into a muddy puddle and tried to take away her dignity simply because, in their eyes, she didn't belong in this setting." The mention of Gustavo and Bruno's names fell like a blow among the audience, sparking a wave of murmurs and shocked glances. Enrique felt the power of justice in his words, fully aware he was calling out the guilty parties. But in that moment, there was no room to soften the truth. This wasn't just personal. It was a stand for justice. "For years, I silently endured the humiliations, the looks of contempt, the hidden laughs in the halls," he admitted, his eyes meeting those in the audience, "thinking that if I worked hard enough, if I honored my mother, those insults would eventually fade. But today, I realize I can no longer stay silent. No one deserves to be treated with scorn, and my mother, the most dignified and resilient person I know, shouldn't have to bear this pain for something she never chose." A heavy, solemn silence settled over the room. Parents, teachers, and students looked at Enrique with expressions of surprise and admiration. Gustavo and Bruno, faces flushed with shame, lowered their eyes, sensing the disapproval from those around them. They tried to blend into the crowd, but it was far too late. Enrique, unwavering, continued. With a voice that trembled yet held undeniable conviction, Enrique said, "What I want to express today is that a person's worth isn't measured by their possessions or appearance, but by their courage, integrity, and the respect they show others. If we truly believe in humanity and in human dignity, we must confront what's happening here and prevent these attitudes from continuing. Because if education can't make us better people, then what is it for?" When he finished, a profound silence filled the hall. Enrique's words left a visible mark on the emotional faces around him. A few teachers discreetly wiped away tears, and many parents looked at their children, reflecting on the message they'd just heard. Luciana, tears streaming down her face, gazed at her son with indescribable pride. Enrique had spoken not just for her, but for everyone who fights in silence. Gustavo and Bruno, utterly defeated, remained frozen in their public shame. Then someone started clapping, and soon everyone joined in. Within moments, the entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding Enrique and Luciana, honoring the courage and truth they had shared. This was more than a graduation speech. It was a lesson in humanity, courage, and true worth. The applause seemed to go on forever. At that moment, Enrique was no longer just a scholarship student. He was the voice of all who face prejudice and exclusion. And his mother, once invisible to that elite, was now seen with honor and respect. When the applause finally died down, Enrique stepped down from the stage and approached Luciana, who wrapped him in a fierce embrace, her pride beyond words. Together, mother and son had transformed a moment of pain into a triumph of dignity and truth, leaving a legacy of respect and empathy that would resonate within that school and in the hearts of everyone present. The impact of Enrique's words was immediate and profound. The day after the ceremony, his speech wasn't just circulating around school, it was being shared among parents, teachers, and students who marveled at the strength of his message. His testimony challenged many of the hidden biases in the community, and people began to ask themselves how such cruelty could have gone unnoticed for so long. For Bruno and Gustavo, the consequences were swift and severe. The public humiliation they faced was only the beginning. When they returned home after graduation, their families confronted them, and the parents, who had once felt proud, now bore a heavy burden of shame, realizing that their sons had become symbols of an arrogant, thoughtless elite. Gustavo's punishment was harsh. His father cancelled the long-awaited study trip to Germany and made him work at the family's factory. "You're going to learn the value of work and respect for others," his father told him, with a firmness that allowed no argument. As for Bruno, he lost the luxury car he had expected as a graduation gift, and his parents decided he would have to start paying his own expenses. For the first time in their lives, both boys were forced to face the consequences of their actions. For Enrique, however, the pain his mother had endured was far from a simple anecdote. Watching her publicly humiliated had left a deep wound, one he knew would need time and patience to heal. After some reflection and discussions with Luciana, who expressed her desire to move past what had happened, Enrique realized that the humiliation they had suffered couldn't simply be forgotten. That's when he decided to seek legal counsel and initiate formal proceedings against Gustavo and Bruno, charging them with public humiliation and emotional damage. The case reawakened public interest, and the powerful testimonies of Enrique and Luciana led even some of Gustavo's and Bruno's parents to acknowledge the gravity of the cruelty that had been inflicted. The defense tried to downplay the incident, arguing it was merely teenage teasing, but Enrique's lawyer dismantled this defense, demonstrating with clear evidence that the harassment went far beyond simple jokes. It was targeted abuse. When the trial concluded, the judge issued a surprising verdict. Bruno and Gustavo were sentenced to several months in jail and ordered to pay restitution to Enrique's family. The ruling aimed not only to punish, but also to give the young men time to reflect on the consequences of their actions. The families, despite their shame, accepted the judgment in silence. For Gustavo and Bruno, the sentence was an abrupt wake-up call to a reality where they were finally forced to confront the consequences of their actions. The months of confinement became a profoundly transformative experience. Without the privileges and comforts they'd always known, they were left to face the arrogance and cruelty of their past behavior. The solitary routine and isolation of their cells provided the space for a slow process of introspection. In that silence, they began to grasp the full weight of their mistakes, recognizing that their actions hadn't been mere pranks, but rather had caused real, deep suffering. Gradually, a sincere remorse began to surface, and the desire to seek forgiveness became more than just a social obligation. It evolved into a true longing to make amends. They weren't sure if they'd be forgiven, but for the first time, they felt an authentic need to try. When their sentence concluded, Gustavo and Bruno were different people, carrying with them a mark of remorse and a deeper understanding of the pain they had inflicted. Together, they decided to seek out Luciana and Enrique to ask for forgiveness, hoping that, although they didn't know if they would be welcomed, they could one day repair even a small part of the damage they'd done. Luciana and Enrique, now in a more peaceful chapter of their lives, were running a small cafe they had opened with the money from the settlement. This new business, built through countless sacrifices, brought renewed joy to Luciana's life and had become a symbol of resilience and strength, one she had created together with her son. One morning, while arranging the counter, Luciana saw two young men enter, hesitant and visibly nervous. Gustavo and Bruno stood before her, and for a moment the past and its pain resurfaced, causing her heart to beat faster. Enrique, who was behind the counter, immediately recognized the two and froze, unsure of how to respond. Gustavo took a step forward, wearing an expression of humility Luciana had never imagined seeing. "Luciana, Enrique, we're here to ask for your forgiveness," Gustavo said, his voice quiet and restrained, but filled with sincerity. "We know what we did was unforgivable, but we need to express how deeply we regret what happened. We've spent a long time reflecting on the pain we caused, and we just want you to know how truly sorry we are." Bruno, looking down, added, "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope you can see that we're ready to make things right however we can. We've come to understand how cruel we were, and all we want is to show that we've genuinely changed." Luciana looked at them with tears in her eyes, surprised by the sincerity she saw in their faces. Enrique, on the other hand, remained silent, still unsure of his feelings. The pain he and his mother had endured was not something easily forgotten. Yet, he also recognized that the desire for change he perceived in their eyes was genuine. Glancing at his mother, he sought her support and approval, which had always guided him. Luciana felt a soft inclination toward them, willing to give them the chance to prove their transformation. After taking a deep breath, she responded with calm firmness. "I accept your apology. I know that nothing will change what happened, but I hope you've learned what respect and dignity truly mean. May this experience make you better people." Relief washed over the faces of Gustavo and Bruno, who were sincerely grateful. From that moment on, their relationship would not be one of friendship, but of respect, a silent bond marked by shared experience and regret. As they watched the young men walk away, Luciana and Enrique exchanged glances, aware that they had made a significant decision. By letting go of the past, they not only reclaimed the dignity they deserved, but also showed that the love and strength they shared could overcome any pain. That morning, as the sun shone on their small cafe, Luciana and Enrique moved forward with their lives, carrying a peace that was rightfully theirs at last. Their painful journey had turned into a lesson in respect, transformation, and redemption, leaving a powerful message of hope and forgiveness for everyone around them. Did you enjoy today's story? If so, subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. See you in the next video.